Okay, we'll move on to the issue of car parking, and in particular the creation of new parking zones for new developments. Our residents' parking permit scheme is currently oversubscribed, resulting in high levels of parking stress across most of the city's streets. New residential developments, and in particular large developments, could add to this parking stress if measures are not taken to address parking. One option we are looking at is to designate a new controlled parking zone around new large residential developments and to allow the new residents of that development to park in that controlled zone only. Do you think the council should pursue an approach along these lines, or are there other measures we should be taking? Gentleman at the front.
Thank you. Thank you. Pascal Bates from VIG. Whilst it would help to have new controlled parking zones to deal with this sort of issue with big developments, to my mind, questions 11 and also question 12, which follows on dealing with financial contributions where you fail as a developer to provide the parking you otherwise should, are perhaps missing the point, which is that Westminster should have policies that permit it to say to developers, if you wish to develop or redevelop this site and increase the number of residential units or put residential units where there weren't any previously, you must provide parking. And if you wish to proceed with your application without providing parking, you must recognise that those units in perpetuity will not have an entitlement to any form of parking on the street.
You mean res park based? Like
yes. So not merely creating new res park zones to ring fence the new development, actually going the whole hog as some other local authorities do and saying that it's part of your policy that there will be res park free developments. Now I know that there are a lot of issues surrounding that, and Westminster has resisted that in the past, but it's caused some very real difficulties when being faced with substantial developments where developers are proposing not merely to put 5 or 10, but dozens, or in one recent case, hundreds of new units on a site that previously had next to no residential. And it caused quite considerable ingenuity to be used by Westminster in order to escape from the straitjacket of its own existing policies and achieve a workable result. Whereas if it had had what we would say are more appropriate policies to start with, you wouldn't have been starting on that back foot. If your policy is that a development should have so much parking, then it should have that much parking, or the people there don't park. They don't buy their way out of it, and there shouldn't be fancy footwork with the parking zones to get round the essential problem of the developer either provides the parking or the people who go to live there pay less money for the flats or houses because they're not going to be parking.
Thanks. Does anyone want to come back on that point?
John Canty, Savile Bird and Axon again. I would actually fully agree with the last comment, and I think a borough such as Westminster should be leading the way, and it should be it shouldn't just be encouraged. It should be should go without saying that developers and residential developments should have car-free agreements, and legal agreements should be put in place so that residents are not able to obtain car permits for on-street parking. And I think that goes for the developments dependent, regardless of the number of parking spaces actually on the site. If you have a car-free development, that should be in place. Also, if you do have parking, say if you had 100 flats and you had 30 spaces, I think you still need to have this legal agreement in place, because if you don't, quite often with the management and the sale, people would still choose to park their cars on the street because it's actually cheaper to purchase the spaces or to rent the spaces within the development. So I think it's very important that goes forward, and I think TfL in particular will be forcing Westminster to go down that line in any case.
Thanks for that.
John Zammit again. Well, I used to have some sympathy with the previous two speakers, but I think we could spend all night on this subject. I think it's a very difficult subject, political hot potato, to not allow people to have res permits. And there are measures we could address. Should you limit the number per household or increase the prices? There's lots of things we should look at. The question first asked about these controlled parking zones, I think it came up in a barracks site in St John's Wood. I mean, I don't agree with that. I mean, they can park outside their home, but they can't visit friends or local shops within their parking zone. So they're just going to drive to Brent Cross or Westfield or something. So the original reason the parking zones partly split in Westminster so you could drive around the area, visit people and use services. And there were other reasons as well. It wasn't revenue generating. Danny's shaking his head. But I think to take away the right to have a res permit is a difficult choice, and people buy the flats net and so on. And we did for a short time have a policy where dealers could enter into agreement to be car free. So I've got some sympathy with it, but I think it's got practical difficulties, and I think that we should go down and explore that route. But also there's other measures that we can explore. One of them would be to change the res parking zones, but again that's a hot potato that no one wants to take down that road. And I
Not
think
in my lifetime.
No, and the cost of the permits could be looked at. And there's still a huge amount of fraud out there. Everywhere you look, there's traders who live in the area who've obtained res permits. So the number of spaces that you need, there is a capacity to obtain those spaces by just tackling more vigorously the fraud. So I think it's a difficult subject, as all committees and politicians have found in the past. But just to have a blanket ban on new developments, car-free developments. But it'd be interesting to know the results of how it's gone in, say, I believe Camden's done it. So I think more research has to be done on it. But it's a long subject to go through. Yeah, difficult subject.
Simon Burkett. Danny, just to encourage you to perhaps take it on in your lifetime, I think one of the reasons that Res Park is actually under so much stress is because the zones are so ginormous. I mean, you can go from Pimlico up to Hyde Park in Zone A, and we get people up there who take their car up there to walk the dog, and then people who are living there can't get a Res Park spot. And similarly, people who travel from where they live, where they may want to park, but because of the convenience of being able to park on a Zone A thing, they go off to the shops somewhere else. So I think a lot of the stress in the Res Park bays are because people travel around because they have a very cheap luxury of being able to do so. And perhaps we can put that on your wish list, Danny. Yeah.